She threatened my mom. Annie spoke, her voice trembling so badly it nearly broke. It was her. She threatened my mother. Mr. Whitaker, please, you have to come see. Richard Whitaker stopped just inside the threshold of his own home. He blinked once, trying to understand what he had just heard after a long, exhausting day. What woman, he asked. Annie, calm down. Who threatened your mother? Who pushed her? Annie Carter stood near the main hall, tears running down her cheeks. Her arms were wrapped tightly across her chest, and she shook her head quickly in panic. No, sir. She wasn't pushed. She was threatened. That woman said she would call the police. She said my mother had to leave this house tonight. Before Richard could ask another question, hurried footsteps sounded from the grand staircase. Vanessa Caldwell rushed into the foyer, one hand gripping the hem of her cream silk dress. Her face carried a look of perfect panic, so polished it almost seemed prepared. Her eyes were wet but not red. Her breathing was quick but controlled. The moment she saw Richard, she moved toward him as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. Richard, you're finally home, Vanessa said, reaching for his arm. I didn't want you to have to witness this ugly scene, especially after such an exhausting meeting, but that woman stole my necklace. Richard did not move. What necklace? My diamond necklace, the one I was going to wear to the pre-wedding dinner. Vanessa turned and pointed toward the stairs. Dorothy took it. I'm sorry. I know you're fond of her, but there is no other explanation. Behind Vanessa, near the wall by the hallway, Dorothy Carter stood in her gray cleaning uniform. Her shoulders had sagged. In one hand, she held a crumpled piece of paper. Her other hand was pressed against her mouth. She was trying to hold back her sobs, but she could not. Annie immediately stepped to her mother's side, placing herself between Dorothy and Vanessa. Her whole body was shaking, but she did not back down. My mother didn't take anything, Annie said. Vanessa looked at her with wounded sympathy. Annie, I understand that you're upset. I truly do. But lying to protect your mother will only make this worse. Don't talk to me as if you pity me, Annie said, her voice small but painfully cold. You made my mother write that letter. You told her that if she didn't leave this house tonight, the police would drag her out. Vanessa's face went pale for a moment, just long enough for Richard to notice. But then she quickly regained control and turned that flash of fear into offense. Richard, she whispered, looking up at him with soft, wounded eyes. Do you hear this? I have just been robbed, and now this girl is standing here, inventing lies to smear me. Annie's lips trembled. I'm not inventing anything. Vanessa lightly touched Richard's sleeve, her fingers soft, almost pleading. Darling, please. You know what people can do when they're afraid. She's just trying to save her mother. I understand that. I even feel sorry for her. But pity cannot change what happened. Richard looked down at Vanessa's hand on his sleeve, then at Annie's face. The pain on the young girl's face did not look staged. It was too real, too broken. He turned to Vanessa. His voice was calm, but sharper than before. Did you say those things to Dorothy? Vanessa blinked. What? That she had to leave tonight. That you would call the police. That they would take her out in front of Annie. Vanessa gave a weak little laugh and placed a hand on her chest. Richard, why would you ask me that? Because Annie just said you did. Annie is upset. That is not an answer. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears again. This time, she leaned closer, lowering her voice into the soft tone she often used when she wanted him to forgive her before he fully understood the problem. Richard, please don't do this to me. I'm frightened. My necklace is missing. I came downstairs and saw the woman who had access to my dressing room acting nervous. Then her daughter started screaming accusations at me. I feel as if I'm being put on trial inside my own home. Annie gasped. You made my mother cry. Vanessa turned to her. Your mother cried because she was caught. No, Annie said, her voice shaking. My mother cried because you scared her. Dorothy quickly reached for Annie's hand. Sweetheart, please. No, Mama. Annie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. No, she doesn't get to do that to you and then stand here pretending she is the one who was hurt. Richard kept his eyes on Vanessa. Did you threaten Dorothy? Vanessa shook her head at once. Absolutely not. Did you make her write a resignation letter? I only suggested that she take responsibility quietly. For theft? For betraying trust. Dorothy says she did not take the necklace. Vanessa's expression tightened. Of course she would say that. And Annie says you threatened her, because Annie is protecting her mother. Annie stepped forward, her voice shaking harder but still clear. She told my mother to sign that paper and disappear before midnight. Those were her exact words. She also said that if my mother didn't do it, she would make sure the police found a reason to believe she was a thief. She said no one would ever hire my mother again after tonight. That is disgusting. Vanessa snapped, then immediately caught herself and softened her voice. Richard, listen to me. I would never say something like that. You know me. Richard did not answer. That silence seemed to frighten Vanessa more than any accusation could have. Darling, Vanessa said, her voice shrinking until it sounded almost helpless. Please, I am going to be your wife in a month. Are you really going to stand here and let them tear my dignity apart? Annie looked at Richard with desperation in her eyes. Mr. Whitaker, my mother cleans houses for a living. She takes 2 buses when the car breaks down. She packs leftovers so I can eat better than she does. But my mother does not steal. She raised me better than that. Those words sank into Richard like cold water. Dorothy had worked in this house for 12 years. She had cleaned rooms no guests ever saw, washed linens after charity dinners, come in during snowstorms when younger staff had called out, and stayed through the hardest months of Eleanor's illness. Richard's late wife had trusted very few people near her in her final days, but she had trusted Dorothy. He could still remember Eleanor's weak voice from her sickbed. Dorothy would rather go hungry than take something that wasn't hers. Vanessa stepped closer and lowered her voice. Richard, I know Eleanor cared about her, but that was years ago. People can change when money is involved. Richard looked at her, and something inside him shifted. Where was the necklace last seen? Vanessa answered very quickly. In my dressing room, in the blue jewelry box. Who discovered it was missing? I did. Was anyone else in the dressing room? Dorothy. Only Dorothy? Vanessa hesitated. She was the only member of staff who was supposed to be there. That is not what I asked. Her mouth tightened. Richard, was anyone else in that part of the house? Vanessa turned her face away for half a second. The florists were coming in and out. The wedding planner's assistants were there too. But none of them had any reason to touch my jewelry. And Dorothy did? She needs money. Dorothy closed her eyes as if something invisible had struck her across the face. Annie moved closer to her mother, one hand gripping Dorothy's sleeve. Richard's voice dropped. Need is not evidence. Vanessa looked wounded again. I cannot believe you are speaking to me like this. I cannot believe you accused Dorothy before I even walked through the door. I have every right to protect what belongs to me. Annie whispered. She's just trying to get rid of us. Vanessa snapped toward her. Enough. Richard spoke before Annie could step back. No, Annie will keep talking. Vanessa froze, but anger flashed in her eyes. Dorothy suddenly stepped forward. Her face was soaked with tears, and her voice was weak, but beneath it was a steadiness that could not be broken. Mr. Whitaker, she said, I swear on my husband's grave that I never touched that necklace. I swear on the man who worked himself to death so our daughter could have a better life. I have cleaned these floors with these hands. I have done laundry, taken out trash, and cleaned up after dinners where no one ever remembered my name. But I have never stolen anything from you. Not one thing. Annie broke down beside her, still clutching her mother's sleeve as if Dorothy's words had torn through the last of her strength. Vanessa let out a cold breath. Everyone knows how to swear when they're caught, Richard. Thieves swear. Liars swear. But that does not make them innocent. Dorothy went still. Annie looked at Vanessa, her face twisted with hurt. How can you say that to my mother? Vanessa did not answer Annie. Instead, she turned back to Richard, her voice soft again, almost whispering beside him. Richard, please, I know this is unpleasant, but you cannot let emotion cloud reason. I am the one whose property was stolen. I am the one standing here humiliated. Why are you letting them make me defend myself as if I am the guilty one? Richard looked at Dorothy first, then at Annie. The young girl's hands were clutching her mother's sleeve, as if that small piece of gray fabric were the only thing keeping her upright. Annie tried to breathe through her tears, but every breath came unevenly. She kept glancing toward the side hallway, toward the part of the house where Vanessa had pulled Dorothy aside. And the fear on Annie's face unsettled Richard, far more than the polished distress on Vanessa's. Samuel stood near the front door, silently waiting for orders. Vanessa seized the moment. She stepped closer to Richard and lowered her voice into a warmth meant only for him. Richard, please. I'm cold, embarrassed, and frightened. I don't want this scene continuing in our home. Send them back to the staff quarters, call the police discreetly, and let this be handled properly. Dorothy shook her head as fresh tears spilled down her face. Please, sir, please don't call them before you know for certain. Please. Annie spun toward Richard. My mother didn't do it. Please don't let them put her in a police car. If Annie's words touched your heart, please like this video to show your support for her and her mother. Comment where you are watching from because someone near you might be watching this story too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories. The words were so painful that Richard felt their weight pressed down on the entire foyer. Dorothy quickly took Annie's hand and squeezed it, trying to comfort her daughter, even though she looked as if she could barely remain standing herself. No one has called the police yet, Richard said. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Is that so? I won't call them until I understand what happened. I already told you what happened. You told me what you believe happened. No, Vanessa said, her voice rising before she quickly softened it again. I told you what I know. My necklace was in my dressing room. Dorothy was there. Now it's gone. Samuel cleared his throat. Sir, I suggest we move this conversation away from the entrance. The staff are becoming unsettled. Richard gave a single nod. The library. A flash of relief crossed Vanessa's face, as if moving into another room meant she had regained control. Dorothy, however, went pale at the word. Annie held her mother's hand tightly as they followed Richard down the hallway, passing framed oil paintings, polished wood, and old family photographs. The library was warm from the fireplace, but no one seemed comforted by the heat. Richard placed his gloves on the table, then turned to Samuel. Close the door, but stay here. Yes, sir. Vanessa sat down without being invited, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her engagement ring catching the firelight. Dorothy remained standing until Richard spoke. Dorothy. Sit down. She hesitated. Sir, I'm all right. No, you're not. Sit down. Dorothy sat on the edge of the leather chair closest to the door. Annie stood beside her with one hand on her mother's shoulder. The poor girl looked as if she were trying to be strong enough to carry them both, while hating herself for still trembling. Richard pointed to the paper in Dorothy's hand. May I see that? Dorothy handed it to him with shaking fingers. The paper was wrinkled from being held too tightly. Richard slowly read the first line. I, Dorothy Carter, hereby resign for violating the trust of the Whitaker family. He looked up. Who wrote this sentence? Vanessa answered before Dorothy could speak. I did. She was too emotional to write clearly. Annie's face tightened. You made my mother copy it. Vanessa turned to her. Annie, I have been very patient with you. No, you haven't, Annie said, her voice almost a whisper. You told my mother to hurry before he came home. Richard looked down at the paper again. Dorothy, do you agree with what this says? No, sir. Dorothy's voice was very small. She told me to write it. Did she tell you what would happen if you refused? Dorothy swallowed hard. Before answering, her eyes instinctively moved to Annie. She said the police would come. She said my name would be dragged through the mud. Vanessa sighed as if she could not believe what she was hearing. Richard, this is becoming ridiculous. Richard folded the paper once, then placed it on the table. What's ridiculous is that a resignation letter was written before anyone had truly asked any questions. Vanessa shot to her feet. I was only trying to keep this from getting worse. It is already very bad, because they are making it that way. Annie lowered her head as tears fell again. We never wanted this to happen. For a moment, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the heating system. Richard walked to the window, not to avoid them, but to give himself 1 second to think before speaking again. Outside, streetlights cut through the falling snow. From the road, his house looked peaceful, but inside, something rotten had begun to show through the polished walls. The phone in his coat pocket vibrated. He nearly ignored it, but the number on the screen was blocked. Richard's jaw tightened. He answered. Whitaker. The voice on the other end was low, rough, and cautious. Don't let her throw that woman out. Richard slowly turned away from the window. Vanessa looked at him in confusion. Samuel lifted his eyes as well. Who is this? Richard asked. She was warned before. Tonight, she's doing it again. Vanessa's expression changed. Richard, who is that? The voice on the phone continued. Ask about the necklace. Ask why the resignation letter was written before the search was over. Ask why she wants that mother out of the house before morning. Richard tightened his grip on the phone. If you know something, Give me your name. I gave my name once. After that, she made sure it no longer meant anything. The line went dead. Richard lowered the phone. Vanessa forced a laugh. Is that the same anonymous coward calling you again? Richard. For heaven's sake. You cannot treat nameless lies as truth. Dorothy's worry was plain on her face. Someone called you about this, sir? Not about the necklace, Richard said. About Vanessa. Vanessa stepped toward him. That is not fair. No, Richard said. What happened in this house tonight is not fair. Her eyes flashed. You are letting strangers and servants turn you against me. Samuel's calm voice came from near the door. Miss Caldwell, I would advise you to be careful with your choice of words. Vanessa turned toward him. And you should remember who will be living in this house after the wedding. The sentence came out too quickly. Before she could soften it, Richard heard every word. So did Annie. Dorothy closed her eyes, and Annie's hand tightened on her mother's shoulder. Richard returned to the table and picked up the resignation letter. After the wedding, he said slowly. So that is what this is about? Vanessa's face softened, but too late. I only meant that things will naturally change. A large house needs order. Dorothy has worked here for 12 years. And I respect that, Vanessa replied quickly. Annie whispered. No, you don't. Vanessa ignored her. But loyalty cannot excuse theft. Dorothy lifted her head. I did not steal from you. Vanessa gave her a pitying smile, but there was no pity in her eyes. Then where is my necklace? Dorothy had no answer. Annie looked at Richard, pleading without daring to step any closer. Please, there has to be some way to prove this. Richard folded the resignation letter and placed it inside the inner pocket of his coat. There is, he said. Vanessa went still. Richard turned to Samuel. Call the head of security to the library immediately. I want the entire camera system opened. Not tomorrow. Not after someone has time to prepare an explanation. Right now. Samuel opened the door at once. Yes, sir. Vanessa's voice trembled. Richard, you cannot be serious. Richard looked at her, his expression calm in a way that was almost frightening. I have never been more serious. Annie covered her mouth as another sob escaped her. But this time, that sob carried a fragile trace of relief. Dorothy reached up and held her daughter's hand between both of her own. Vanessa stood beside the fireplace, the gentle firelight glowing behind her, her face still trying to hold the same wounded expression. But Richard no longer trusted the face she showed him. He stood there waiting for security to arrive, and the folded resignation letter inside his coat suddenly felt heavier than paper. The head of security arrived 3 minutes later with a tablet under his arm and his coat still damp from the gatehouse. His name was Marcus Hill, a former Chicago police sergeant who had worked for Richard for nearly 8 years and never once raised his voice inside the Whitaker home. Tonight, even he paused at the library door when he saw Dorothy sitting with her hands locked together, Annie standing close beside her, and Vanessa by the fireplace with a face too composed for what she claimed had happened. You ask for me, Mr. Whitaker? Marcus said. Richard pointed to the desk. I want camera access from this afternoon. Start with the west corridor outside Vanessa's dressing room, then the laundry area, the service entrance, and the rear delivery door. Marcus nodded. What time frame? Vanessa answered quickly. There's no need to make this into a production. The necklace was there around 4. I noticed it missing after 5. Richard did not look at her. 3 to 6. Marcus tapped the tablet. Yes, sir. Annie watched his fingers move across the screen. Her eyes were swollen now, and she kept swallowing like her throat hurt. Dorothy reached up and touched her daughter's wrist, but Annie could not take her eyes off the tablet. To her, that small screen had become the difference between her mother walking out with shame or standing there with her name intact. Vanessa crossed her arms. Richard, I'm asking you one last time. Please don't do this. Not like this. We can handle it privately. We are handling it privately, Richard said. With security? With staff listening outside? Dorothy was accused in front of staff. Vanessa's lips tightened. Because the situation required urgency. Then the truth can have the same urgency. Marcus glanced up, then back down, careful not to step into the argument. I have the west corridor. He placed the tablet on Richard's desk and turned it so Richard could see. The footage showed the hallway outside Vanessa's dressing room. At 3:42, Dorothy walked in with her cleaning cart. She stayed about 12 minutes and came out carrying a small trash liner and folded towels. Nothing in her hands looked unusual. At 4:06, two assistants from the wedding planner's office passed by with garment bags. At 4:19, a florist carried a white box toward the guest parlor by mistake, then turned around. Vanessa lifted her chin. There. Dorothy was in there. Richard kept watching. Keep going. At 4:31, Vanessa herself appeared in the hallway. She moved quickly from her dressing room toward the stairs, then came back less than a minute later. Her hands were empty on the footage, at least from that angle. She forgot something, Vanessa said before anyone asked. I forgot my phone. Richard finally turned to her. No one asked yet. Her cheeks colored. I'm explaining. Marcus changed the camera. Laundry hall. The laundry area appeared on screen. Dorothy entered at 4:17 with towels. She sorted them, wiped the counter, checked a shelf, then left. Annie drew in a small breath when she saw her mother moving on camera with the same tired, careful steps she saw every day. Nothing hidden, nothing rushed, just work. Then the screen showed Vanessa at 4:36. She entered from the side passage, paused near the doorway, and looked down the hall before stepping inside. In her right hand was a folded white cloth. Richard's eyes narrowed. Vanessa spoke at once. That's a hand towel. I had makeup on my fingers. Marcus paused the footage without being told. Richard looked at the screen, then at Vanessa. Why were you in the laundry area? I just told you. No, you told me what was in your hand. I asked why you were there. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. I was looking for Dorothy. Dorothy lifted her head. You didn't call for me. I didn't see you. You knew where I was. You came to me later. Annie's voice shook. After you hid whatever was in that cloth. Vanessa turned on her. You don't know what you saw. I know what I heard, Annie said. And I know what you did to my mama after. Richard raised a hand, not to silence Annie, but to keep the room from breaking apart. Marcus, continue. Marcus resumed the footage. Vanessa stayed in the laundry room for less than a minute. The angle did not show the inside counter clearly. When she came out, the white cloth was still in her hand, but it looked flatter now. Vanessa breathed out. There is nothing there. Not enough, Richard said. But not nothing. She turned toward him, hurt returning to her face. So now I'm not allowed to walk through my own home? Richard's reply was quiet. It is not your home yet. The words struck harder than he intended, but he did not take them back. Vanessa looked away first. Marcus cleared his throat. There's another angle from the rear delivery camera. It catches part of the laundry counter through the side glass, but the quality is poor. Pull it up, Richard said. It may take a moment. While Marcus worked, Dorothy whispered to Annie, Breathe, sweetheart. Annie nodded, but tears slipped down again. I'm trying. Richard heard it and felt a twist of regret. This was his house, his staff, his fiancée. Yet Annie stood there begging for basic fairness, as though fairness were a favor she had no right to expect. Vanessa moved closer to him again. Richard, look at what this is doing. We're a month from our wedding. People are already talking because you postponed the final tasting and delayed the seating chart. Now this? An anonymous caller, a frightened employee, her emotional daughter, and grainy footage of me carrying a towel. Richard said, You know about the postponed tasting? Her expression shifted. Of course I know. I'm the bride. I didn't tell you I delayed the seating chart. Vanessa went still for half a second. The planner mentioned it. Richard filed that away. Did she? Yes. Before he could answer, Marcus spoke. I have the rear delivery angle. The tablet showed a darker, wider shot from outside the service area. Snow blurred part of the glass, and the image had a faint delay. But the laundry room counter was visible through the side window. Vanessa entered the frame. She placed the white cloth down, opened it, and bent toward Dorothy's cleaning cart. Annie made a small sound and covered her mouth. Dorothy gripped the chair arms. The footage was not clear enough to show the necklace, but it was clear enough to show Vanessa's hand going into the cart. Vanessa stepped forward. That proves nothing. Richard did not answer. It proves nothing, she repeated louder. I could have been moving a towel. Marcus looked at Richard. There may be a closer file from the motion sensor near the delivery shelf. It doesn't always save unless movement triggers it. Check it, Richard said. Vanessa's breathing changed. This is ridiculous. No, Annie whispered. What you did was ridiculous. Vanessa snapped her head toward her. You should be ashamed of yourself. Annie's face broke. I was. That's what you wanted. You wanted us ashamed enough to leave. Dorothy stood then, slowly, as if every bone hurt. Miss Caldwell, I have cleaned your room, folded your clothes, carried your boxes, and never spoken against you. If you wanted me gone, you could have asked Mr. Whitaker. You did not have to put theft on my name. Vanessa's voice came cold. I did not put anything on your name. Richard's phone vibrated again in his pocket. Another blocked number. Everyone saw him look at it this time. He answered and put it to his ear without speaking. The same rough voice came through. You're close now. Richard's eyes moved to Vanessa. The caller said, rear shelf camera, 436. Don't let her talk you out of it. The line went dead. Richard lowered the phone. Marcus looked up from the tablet. Sir, I found the motion file. Vanessa whispered. Richard. He turned the tablet toward himself. Play it, he said. Marcus tapped the file, and the image opened in a tighter angle than the last one. The camera sat above a metal shelf near the rear delivery door, aimed partly toward the laundry counter. The picture was grainy, the color dull under fluorescent light, but it caught the exact corner where Dorothy's cleaning cart had been parked. Vanessa appeared at the edge of the frame. She came in quickly, one hand holding the folded white cloth. She checked the doorway, then moved toward the cart. On the screen, she opened the cloth just enough for a flash of diamonds to catch the light. Annie made a small, wounded sound. Dorothy covered her mouth with both hands. Vanessa's face hardened. That could be anything. Richard did not look away from the screen. Let it play. Vanessa placed the cloth inside the lower basket of Dorothy's cart, tucked it beneath a stack of used hand towels, then smoothed the towels over it. She stood there for a second, breathing fast, then walked out through the side passage. Marcus stopped the video. No one spoke at first. The fire kept moving in the grate. Somewhere far down the hallway, a house phone rang once and stopped. Richard's hand rested on the edge of the desk, his knuckles pale. Vanessa forced a laugh. You're misunderstanding what you saw. Richard turned to her. Then explain it. I was putting a towel where it should have gone. With diamonds inside it? You don't know that was my necklace. Annie wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. You wrapped it. I heard the paper in the box when you opened it upstairs. Mama was still in the pantry when you went by. Vanessa snapped. You heard nothing. Annie's voice got smaller, but she kept going. I heard you. I followed because you had been mean to Mama all week. I thought you were going to complain about her again. Then I saw you come out of the laundry hall, and later you made her search her own cart like she was guilty. Dorothy turned to her daughter. Annie, why didn't you tell me? Because she said she'd call the police. Annie's breath broke. She said if I opened my mouth, she'd make them think I helped you. Dorothy reached for her, pulling her close. Oh, baby. Vanessa raised both hands, tears returning. This is madness. Richard, please. She is changing her story every minute. First, she says I threatened Dorothy. Now she says she followed me. Now suddenly she heard something upstairs. Does that sound credible to you? Richard's voice stayed quiet. It sounds like fear. It sounds like theater. Annie looked at Richard as if that word had cut her. I'm not acting. I know, Richard said. Vanessa turned on him. You know, just like that? I know what I saw. You saw a towel. I saw you hide something in Dorothy's cart. Vanessa's eyes filled, but her mouth tightened. Fine, I put the towel there. I was upset. I wasn't thinking. Maybe I set it down and forgot. That doesn't mean I framed anyone. Marcus spoke from the desk. Sir, the timestamp is 4:36. Miss Caldwell reported the necklace missing at 5:12. Richard looked at Vanessa. You reported it missing after you put it in Dorothy's cart. Vanessa's face went pale again. No, I didn't know it was there. Then why accuse Dorothy? Because she was the only one with access. Richard gave a short breath. You keep saying that after watching yourself place something in her cart. Dorothy's voice rose for the first time. Miss Caldwell, you let me cry. You let my daughter beg. You stood there and told me to write myself out of this house. Vanessa did not answer her. She kept her focus on Richard. as if Dorothy's pain was a side issue. Richard, I made a mistake in judgment. I panicked. You know what this wedding has been like. Everyone watching, everyone waiting for one wrong step. I thought the necklace was gone, and I reacted badly. Annie looked at her mother, then at Vanessa. You didn't react badly. You planned it. Vanessa's eyes cut toward her. Enough from you. Richard's voice stopped her. Do not speak to Annie that way again. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She seemed to understand she had lost some ground she could not easily recover. Marcus cleared his throat. Mr. Whitaker, do you want me to retrieve the cart? Yes. Dorothy stood at once. Sir, please, I don't want anyone going through my things like that. Richard turned to her. Dorothy, I'm sorry, but if the necklace is where she put it, it proves what happened. Dorothy pressed her lips together. She nodded once, though it cost her. All right. Annie held her hand. I'll go with you, Mama. No, Richard said. You both stay here. Marcus and Samuel will bring the cart untouched. Vanessa took a step forward. Richard, don't humiliate me further. He looked at her then. You humiliated Dorothy in the entryway. You tried to send her out in the cold with a lie attached to her name. Do not ask me to protect your comfort before I protect her truth. Vanessa's tears spilled now, but Richard no longer moved toward them. Samuel and Marcus left the library. The door closed behind them. The minutes that followed stretched hard. Dorothy sat again, both hands folded against her knees, whispering under her breath. Annie stood at her side, one arm across her own waist, trying not to shake. Richard wanted to say something that would help, but every sentence he thought of felt too small. At last he said, Dorothy, I should have asked questions before tonight. She looked up, startled. Sir? I should have noticed more. Dorothy shook her head. You had no reason to think this would happen. That doesn't make it right. Annie spoke softly. Mama always said you were a fair man. Richard felt the words land heavier than praise. Tonight I need to be. Vanessa wiped her cheeks with careful fingers. This is what she does, Richard. She makes you feel guilty. That's how people like her survive in houses like this. Dorothy's head lowered. Annie's face crumpled. People like her? My mother works. She doesn't use anybody. Vanessa sighed. I didn't mean it that way. Yes, you did, Richard said. The door opened before Vanessa could answer. Samuel entered first, carrying a sealed clear evidence bag. Marcus followed with Dorothy's cleaning cart, careful not to touch the lower basket. Inside the bag was the folded white cloth. Samuel placed it on the desk. Marcus opened it with gloved hands. The diamond necklace lay in the center. Dorothy let out a cry and folded into Annie's arms. Annie held her mother tightly, crying with her, both of them shaking from the release of fear that had nearly crushed them. Richard looked at the necklace, then at Vanessa. She had no story ready this time. Her lips moved once, but nothing came out. Richard picked up the resignation letter from his coat pocket and laid it beside the necklace. The two objects told the whole story. The jewel used as bait, and the paper meant to bury a woman's name. He turned to Marcus. Save every copy of that footage. Lock it. No one deletes a second. Yes, sir. Then Richard faced Vanessa. His voice was low, controlled, and final enough to make Annie lift her head. Now, he said, you are going to tell Dorothy the truth. Vanessa's mouth trembled, but the words Richard asked for did not come. She looked at the necklace on the desk, then at the folded resignation letter beside it, as if both objects had turned against her. For once, the silk dress, the ring, the careful tears, and the soft voice could not carry her out of what everyone had seen. Richard, she said, almost whispering, please don't make me do this. Richard's face did not change. You made Dorothy do worse. Dorothy shook her head quickly. Mr. Whitaker, I don't need. Yes, you do, Richard said, though his voice stayed gentle with her. You may not want it, but you deserve it. Annie held her mother tighter. Poor Annie's cheeks were wet, her breath still uneven, and every time Vanessa moved, her body reacted as if another blow might come. She kept one hand on Dorothy's shoulder, fingers curled into the fabric of the gray uniform Vanessa had tried to turn into evidence of guilt. Vanessa wiped under one eye with the tip of her finger. I was scared. Richard said nothing. I thought she was trying to turn you against me, Vanessa continued. The way you speak to her, the way everyone in this house treats her like she's... She stopped before finishing. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. Marcus lowered his tablet. Like she's what? Richard asked. Vanessa pressed her lips together. Like she has more say here than I do. Dorothy looked up, confused through her tears. Miss Caldwell, I clean. That's all I do. No, Vanessa snapped, then softened too late. No, Dorothy. That isn't all. You have history here. Everyone respects you. Samuel listens to you. Richard trusts you. Even Annie walks around here like she has the right to question me. Annie's voice came thin. I only questioned you because you hurt my mama. Vanessa turned toward her. I did not hurt her. I panicked. You threatened her, Annie said. I said things I should not have said. You said the police would drag her out. Vanessa looked away. I was upset. Richard's voice cut through the excuse. Did you put the necklace in Dorothy's cart? Vanessa closed her eyes. Answer me. Yes, she said, barely loud enough. Dorothy covered her mouth again. Annie began crying harder, but quietly, as if she did not want to take up too much space even in her own pain. Richard's jaw tightened. Say it to her. Vanessa looked at Dorothy, and for a second pride held her face still. Then she seemed to understand there was no way around it. I put the necklace in your cart, she said. Dorothy's shoulders sank as if the truth itself had weight. Why? Vanessa swallowed. I wanted you gone before the wedding. Annie made a small sound. Mama never did anything to you. Vanessa's eyes flashed. You don't understand what it's like. To what? Annie asked. Be rich? Be embarrassed by people who work hard? Annie, Dorothy whispered, but there was no strength in it. Richard let Annie speak. Vanessa turned back to him, desperate now. Richard, she doesn't know what people say. She doesn't know how society works. After we marry, every dinner, every charity board, every guest in this house will look at me and judge whether I can manage your world. Your staff is too familiar. The lines are blurred. People notice things like that. Richard's voice was low. People noticed Dorothy's dignity long before they noticed your name. Vanessa flinched. That is cruel. No, he said. Cruel was handing an innocent woman a false confession and telling her to disappear before midnight. I wasn't thinking clearly. You thought clearly enough to pick the one person who could least afford the accusation. Vanessa breathed in sharply. That's not fair. Dorothy rose from the chair, slowly. Annie tried to steady her, but Dorothy touched her hand as if to say she could stand for this part. Her voice shook, yet each word came out clear. Miss Caldwell, I have worked in houses most of my life. I know when people don't like seeing me come through the front hall. I know when a smile is for guests and not for me. I have lived long enough to know the difference, but I never thought you would put theft on my name. Vanessa's eyes watered again. I said I was sorry. No, Annie said. You didn't. Vanessa looked at her, annoyed. I just admitted it. That's not the same. The words hung there, simple and painful. Richard looked at Annie, and something in his expression softened. She was still afraid, still holding her mother like the world might snatch her away, but she had not bent under Vanessa's voice. Dorothy wiped her cheeks with both hands. My husband died with my name clean. He didn't leave us money. He left us that. A good name. That is what I tried to give my daughter. Tonight, you almost took it like it was nothing. Vanessa's face shifted, but whether from shame or frustration, Richard could not tell. Samuel stepped forward. Mrs. Carter, would you like some water? Dorothy nodded, but Annie answered first. Please. Samuel moved to the side table and poured a glass, then handed it to Dorothy with both hands, the way he would have served a guest. Dorothy accepted it, embarrassed by the care, and whispered, Thank you, Mr. Reed. Richard turned to Marcus. Has the footage been backed up? Yes, sir. I saved it to the secure drive and copied the time-stamped files. No one can alter them without my access. Good. Vanessa's head lifted. Why would you need copies? Richard looked at her. Because you accused Dorothy of a crime. I told you, I panicked. You created evidence. Her voice dropped. Are you going to call the police on me? Dorothy stiffened. Annie looked at Richard with frightened eyes, as if another official car outside might break her mother all over again. Richard noticed. He did not answer quickly. I'm going to decide what happens after Dorothy tells me what she wants, he said. Vanessa laughed once, in disbelief. Dorothy decides now? Richard stepped closer to the desk and picked up the resignation letter. She was the one you tried to ruin. Vanessa's face hardened. You cannot let a cleaning woman decide our future. Richard looked at her, and this time no softness remained. Our future is no longer in her hands. You put it in yours when you hid that necklace. Vanessa's lips parted, but no argument came. Dorothy set the glass down. Sir, I don't want revenge. I just don't want my daughter to remember this house as the place where her mother begged and nobody listened. Annie lowered her head, crying again. Richard turned toward her. Annie. She looked up slowly. I heard you, he said. I should have heard you sooner, but I hear you now. That broke what little control Annie had left. She covered her face, and Dorothy pulled her close, murmuring the kind of comfort only a mother could give, even while she was the one who had been wounded. Richard looked at the necklace one last time. It sat on the desk under the library light, expensive and useless, no longer a symbol of love or status, just a trap that had failed. Then he turned to Samuel. Gather the senior staff in the main hall, he said. Vanessa stepped forward. Richard, no. Yes, he said. Dorothy was accused where people could hear it. Her name will be cleared where people can hear it too. Samuel did not hesitate. He opened the library door and stepped into the hall with the quiet speed of a man who understood that dignity, once damaged in public, had to be restored in public too. Marcus gathered the tablet, the saved footage, and the sealed bag with the necklace inside. Dorothy remained beside the chair, one hand pressed against her chest, as if she still could not trust that the floor would hold her. Vanessa moved toward Richard. Please, she said under her breath. Don't parade this in front of everyone. Richard looked at her. Dorothy was accused in front of everyone. I was upset. You were deliberate. Her face tightened. You are going to humiliate the woman you're supposed to marry? Richard's reply came without heat. No, I'm going to correct what you did. Annie helped Dorothy stand. The poor girl's hand shook as she fixed the collar of her mother's uniform, trying to make Dorothy look less wounded before they stepped out. It was such a small act, and somehow it hurt Richard to see it. Annie should have been thinking about homework, dinner, a ride home, anything ordinary. Instead, she was trying to hold her mother together in a billionaire's library while a diamond necklace sat on a desk like a loaded weapon. Dorothy whispered, Annie, I'm all right. No, Mama, Annie said softly, but I'm right here. Richard heard that and turned away for a second. He did not trust himself to speak. They walked to the main hall together. The staff had already begun gathering near the staircase. Kitchen workers, housekeepers, the driver, 2 maintenance men, the night doorman, and Mrs. Alvarez from the pantry, who clutched her apron with both hands. No one spoke above a whisper. They had all heard enough to know something had gone badly wrong, but not enough to know whether Dorothy would leave in shame or Vanessa would remain protected by her place at Richard's side. Vanessa paused at the edge of the hall. Richard, this is unnecessary. He did not stop. Stand there. Her eyes flashed. Don't speak to me like staff. He turned then, and his voice dropped. Tonight you tried to turn staff into evidence. You can stand where I ask you to stand. A few faces lowered at that, not from fear of Richard, but from the shock of hearing him speak to Vanessa that way. She pulled her shoulders back, fighting for control, and took her place near the table where her empty jewelry case still sat open. Richard moved to the center of the hall. Dorothy stood a few steps behind him, but Annie stayed beside her, close enough that their sleeves touched. Richard noticed Dorothy's knees tremble. He pulled a chair from the wall. Dorothy, sit. She shook her head. Sir, I can stand. I know you can. Sit anyway. Annie guided her down. Dorothy sat slowly, embarrassed by the attention. Annie stood behind the chair and laid both hands on her mother's shoulders. Her face was wet again, but she lifted her chin when Vanessa looked in her direction. Richard faced the staff. A serious accusation was made tonight. Miss Caldwell's diamond necklace was reported missing. Several staff members shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, Lord have mercy, before catching herself. Richard continued, that accusation was false. A breath moved through the hall. Dorothy covered her face. Annie bent close to her ear. You hear that, Mama? He said it. Vanessa stepped forward. Richard, you don't have to. He raised one hand. Do not interrupt me. She stopped, her mouth still open. Richard looked at Marcus. Play the footage. Marcus connected the tablet to the wall monitor used for security alerts and household schedules. The screen lit with the rear delivery camera angle. At first, there was only the laundry area, pale and empty under overhead light. Then Vanessa appeared, moving fast, the folded white cloth in her hand. No one made a sound. On the screen, Vanessa checked the haul, opened the cloth, and placed the hidden necklace inside Dorothy's cleaning cart. The video played for less than a minute, but by the end of it, Vanessa's face had gone still in a way no acting could soften. Marcus stopped the clip. Richard spoke again. The necklace was not stolen by Dorothy Carter. It was placed in her cart by Vanessa Caldwell. Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself. The driver shook his head once and looked away. One of the younger housekeepers began to cry quietly. Vanessa tried to recover. I made a mistake. I was under pressure. Anyone who has planned a wedding at this level would understand. Samuel's voice cut in, calm but firm. Ma'am, most people under pressure order coffee. They do not frame a woman for theft. A few staff members looked at him in surprise. Samuel had served the Whitaker family long enough to know when silence became cowardice. Vanessa turned to Richard. Are you going to let him speak to me like that? Yes, Richard said. Her expression hardened. After everything I've done for you? Annie's voice came from behind Dorothy's chair. What did my mama do to you? Vanessa looked at her but did not answer. Annie swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. She cleaned your room. She folded your clothes. She said yes, ma'am, even when you talked to her like she was dirt. What did she do that made you hate her so much? Dorothy reached up and touched Annie's hand. Enough, baby. But Annie could not stop. No, Mama. She almost took your name from you. That sentence struck the hall harder than the video. Richard saw more than one staff member look down. They understood what Annie meant. A job could be replaced, though not easily. Money could be earned again, slowly and painfully. But a good name, once stained in the wrong circles, could follow a woman through every interview, every reference call, every landlord, every church friend who heard a rumor and passed it along with a lowered voice. Richard turned to Dorothy. Mrs. Carter, I owe you an apology. Dorothy looked up quickly. Sir, you don't have to. I do. He faced her fully. This happened in my house, under my roof. You gave this family 12 years of honest work, and tonight you were forced to defend your name against a lie. I am sorry. Dorothy's lips trembled. I only wanted the truth known. It is known now. Vanessa let out a bitter breath. Wonderful. She has her apology. Can we stop this performance? Richard turned toward her slowly. Performance? You've made your point. No, he said. I don't think I have. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Richard. He reached into his coat and took out the folded resignation letter. He held it up so everyone could see it. This was prepared for Dorothy to sign tonight. A letter saying she had broken trust with this household. Dorothy closed her eyes again. Annie's hands tightened on her shoulders. Richard tore the paper once, then again, then a third time. The pieces fell into his palm. No one will use this lie against her. Not in this house. Not anywhere. Vanessa's voice dropped. You're making a mistake. Richard looked at the torn paper in his hand, then at the necklace on the table. No, he said. I made the mistake before I walked in. Vanessa did not answer at once. The torn pieces of the resignation letter rested in Richard's palm, small and useless now, but Dorothy looked at them as if he had torn a chain from her wrists. Annie kept both hands on her mother's shoulders. Her fingers trembled, yet she did not let go, not even when Vanessa took a step forward with her face tight and her voice lowered. You're letting this get out of hand, Vanessa said. You're angry. I understand that, but you need to think carefully before you say something you can't take back. Richard closed his hand around the torn paper. I am thinking carefully. Then think about next month. Think about the wedding, the guests, the press, the board members flying in from New York. Think about what people will say if they hear you let a staff matter destroy your engagement. Annie looked up at that, hurt passing across her face again. A staff matter? Vanessa ignored her. Richard did not. He turned slightly toward Annie. Say what you need to say. Annie swallowed. My mama's not a matter. Dorothy reached up, touching Annie's hand. Baby. No, Mama. Annie's voice was thin, but the words came with effort and care. She keeps talking like you're something on a list. Like you're a broken plate or a stain on the carpet. You're a person. A few. Vanessa let out a strained breath. This is exactly what I mean. She is emotional, Richard. She's making speeches because she knows it works on you. Richard looked at Vanessa. Annie is speaking more truth than anyone else in this hall tonight. Vanessa's mouth tightened. So that's it? I'm the villain now? You hid your necklace in Dorothy's cart. I admitted that. You threatened her. I said things under pressure. You prepared a false resignation letter. Vanessa's face flushed. I was trying to avoid scandal. For yourself. For us, she said quickly. For our future. Richard shook his head once. Do not put this on us. Her voice softened again, and she moved closer, as if the distance itself frightened her. Richard, please. I made one terrible decision. I know that. But I was overwhelmed. The wedding, your late wife's memory in every hallway, staff who still treat me like a visitor, and you pulling away from me these last few days because of those calls. I felt cornered. Dorothy looked down at her lap. Annie noticed and bent toward her. Mama, don't listen, Vanessa heard. You don't know anything about marriage, Annie. Annie lifted her face. I know you don't hurt people just because you feel cornered. Richard's eyes moved to Annie, and for a second his expression softened. Then he turned back to Vanessa. That's enough, he said. Vanessa blinked. Enough? Enough excuses. Her eyes widened, not with sadness this time, but with fear beginning to break through. Richard, he set the torn paper on the table beside the necklace. Dorothy, I need to ask you something in front of everyone. Dorothy's hands tightened. Yes, sir. Did Vanessa tell you to leave this house tonight? Dorothy nodded. Yes, sir. Did she tell you she would call the police if you refused? Yes, sir. Did she tell you your name would be ruined? Dorothy's voice faded. Yes. Annie's lips quivered. She pressed one hand over her mouth, trying to keep quiet, but tears slipped through her fingers. Richard turned to Annie. And you heard it? Annie nodded quickly. I was outside the door. I shouldn't have listened, but I heard Mama crying. I thought maybe she was sick or something. Then I heard Miss Caldwell say Mama had to sign the letter and disappear before you got back. Vanessa said, she is twisting it. Richard lifted a hand without looking at her. Do not interrupt her. Annie wiped her face and forced the rest out. She said if Mama loved me, she would leave quietly. She said if police came, I'd have to watch them take her away. Mama kept saying she didn't do anything. She kept saying please. And Miss Caldwell just kept telling her to sign. Dorothy bent forward then, one hand over her eyes. The sound that left her was not loud, but it carried through the hall. Annie dropped beside her chair and wrapped both arms around her waist. I'm sorry, Mama, Annie cried. I should have come in sooner. Dorothy pulled her close. No, you did nothing wrong. I was scared. I know. Richard looked away for a moment because the sight cut deeper than he expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was plain. A mother trying to comfort her daughter after being the one broken open. A young woman apologizing for being afraid when fear had been used against her on purpose. Vanessa shifted near the table. This is unbearable, Samuel answered before Richard could. For once, ma'am, we agree. Vanessa turned toward him. You have no right. I have served this family since Mr. Whitaker was younger than Annie, Samuel said. I have seen grief in this house. I have seen illness. I have seen hard winters and hard men. But I have not seen anyone plant a jewel in a worker's cart and call it dignity. The staff did not applaud. They did not need to. Their faces changed just enough for Vanessa to understand that the house was no longer bending around her. Richard spoke to Marcus. Print a written report tonight. Save the footage in 3 separate places. I want the resignation letter photographed with the necklace and the security timestamps attached. Vanessa's voice sharpened. For what purpose? For the record. The record? She gave a bitter laugh. Are you building a case against me? Richard looked at her. I am protecting Dorothy from you. That landed harder than shouting would have. Vanessa's eyes filled again, but Richard did not move toward her. Annie noticed. Dorothy noticed. Even Vanessa noticed. Richard, she said, her voice breaking into that familiar softness. I love you. Richard's face tightened, as if the words had reached him from very far away. No, he said quietly. You love what you were about to become. Vanessa stepped back. That is cruel. He looked at Dorothy, then at Annie, then at the necklace. Cruel is what you did when you thought no one would believe them. Vanessa pressed both hands together. I can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll give her money. I'll make it right. Dorothy lifted her head. My name is not for sale. Annie looked at her mother with wet pride, still kneeling beside the chair. Richard nodded once. No, it isn't. Vanessa stood there with nothing left to offer except the same beauty that had carried her through every room until tonight. But beauty could not erase a timestamp. It could not unwrite the letter. It could not remove the fear from Annie's face or the ache from Dorothy's voice. Richard took a slow breath and turned toward the staircase. Vanessa, he said, go upstairs. Pack what you need for the night. Her face changed. What? You will not stay under this roof tonight. Richard, you can't mean that. I do. The wedding. There will be no discussion about the wedding tonight. She shook her head, stunned. You're sending me away because of her? Richard's voice stayed even. I'm sending you away because of you. Vanessa looked around the hall, searching for one friendly face. There was none. Dorothy sat with Annie beside her, both exhausted, both wounded, but no longer alone. Richard turned to Samuel. Have Martin bring Miss Caldwell's car to the front. Marcus, stay with the footage. No one touches that necklace except you. Yes, sir, Marcus said. Samuel nodded. I'll see to the car. Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper. You're going to regret this. Richard looked at her, tired beyond anger. I already regret too much. For the first time that night, Vanessa had no answer. She gathered the front of her silk dress and walked toward the staircase, not as the future mistress of the house, but as a woman being asked to leave it. Annie watched her go, then turned back to Dorothy and held on as if her mother might vanish if she let go. Dorothy stroked her daughter's hair with shaking hands. It's over? Annie whispered. Richard heard the question and came closer. No, he said gently, but the lie is... Richard's words settled over Annie slowly. The lie was over, but her body had not caught up to that truth yet. She still held Dorothy as if the floor might open beneath them. Dorothy kept one arm around her daughter, and the other pressed to her own chest, breathing in short, careful pulls. Around them, the staff began to shift, not knowing whether to return to work, offer comfort, or wait for the next command. Richard looked at Samuel. Everyone can go back to their stations, but no one discusses this outside this house tonight. Samuel nodded. You heard Mr. Whitaker. Quietly. Please. The staff moved away in small groups. Mrs. Alvarez paused near Dorothy and touched her shoulder. I'm sorry, honey, she whispered. Dorothy nodded, unable to answer. Annie watched the woman leave, then lowered her head. Mama, I thought they were going to take you. Dorothy cupped Annie's face. They didn't, but they almost did. Dorothy's mouth trembled. She did not deny it. Come here. Annie folded into her again, and for a moment Richard felt like an intruder in his own hall. Money had bought every inch of the house, but it had not bought the right to witness a mother and daughter hurt like that. He turned away and saw the necklace still on the table in its clear bag, the diamonds cold under the chandelier. Vanessa had wanted it to prove power. Now it looked like evidence. Marcus came closer. Sir, the original footage is secure. I'll keep the necklace logged until you decide what to do with it. Good, Richard said. No one returns it to Miss Caldwell. Marcus gave a short nod. Understood. From upstairs came the sound of a drawer closing hard. Annie flinched. Dorothy felt it and tightened her hold. It's all right, Richard noticed. She won't come near you. Annie looked at him. She said things like that before. Richard's face changed. What things? Dorothy shook her head quickly. Sir, not tonight. Yes, tonight, Richard said, though not harshly. If there is more, I need to know. Annie wiped her cheeks with both hands. She said after the wedding, Mama wouldn't be needed. She said some people get too comfortable when kindness is mistaken for friendship. She said you were sentimental because of your wife. Richard's hand closed slowly at his side. Dorothy looked ashamed, as if Annie had revealed something private. Mr. Whitaker, I didn't want to bring every little thing to you. That was not little. It was talk. It was warning. Dorothy lowered her eyes. Women like me learn to keep working through talk. Richard hated how simply she said it. No anger, no complaint, just a fact carried for too many years. The front door opened, and Martin, the driver, stepped in from the cold. Mr. Reed said to bring Miss Caldwell's car around. Richard nodded. Keep the engine running. Yes, sir. Upstairs. Footsteps moved across the landing. Vanessa came down a few minutes later, with a small leather suitcase in one hand and a coat over her arm. She had washed her face, but her eyes were red now. The softness she wore before had sharpened into something guarded. She paused when she saw Dorothy still seated in the hall. You're still here, Vanessa said. Annie immediately stepped in front of her mother. Richard moved before the moment could go further. Speak to me. Vanessa looked at him. I was speaking to no one. That will be the problem your whole life if you don't learn otherwise. Her lips pressed together. I don't deserve to be thrown out like some criminal. Dorothy made a faint sound at the word, but said nothing. Richard's voice remained steady. You planted stolen property in Dorothy's cart, threatened her with police, and tried to force her to sign a false resignation. What word would you prefer? Vanessa's eyes went wet again. You're angry. Fine. Be angry. But don't act as though I'm some stranger. We have a wedding in 4 weeks. We had a wedding in 4 weeks. The suitcase shifted in her hand. Richard, she said, quieter now. Don't say that in front of them. Annie's face twisted, but she held her tongue. Dorothy lowered her head, trying to disappear from a conversation that had already wounded her too much. Richard saw that and made his decision cleaner. This is not a private embarrassment, Vanessa. You made it public when you accused Dorothy in this hall. I panicked. No, you planned. She swallowed. I want to talk to you alone. You lost that privilege tonight. For the first time, Vanessa looked genuinely afraid. Are you ending this? Richard took a slow breath. A month of invitations, contracts, photographers, hotel reservations, guest lists, seating charts, and society pages passed through his mind. Then he looked at Annie, pale and exhausted, still guarding her mother from a woman in silk. The answer became simple. I'm postponing everything as of tonight. Vanessa's eyes widened. Postponing? Every event, every contract, every announcement. My attorney will speak with yours in the morning. She gripped the suitcase handle. You're going to let one night ruin us? One night revealed us. No, she whispered. It revealed them. It revealed how easily they can make you doubt me. Annie could not stay quiet. We didn't make him do anything. You did. Vanessa turned, anger breaking through. You should be grateful he even lets you stand here. Dorothy rose so quickly the chair moved behind her. Do not speak to my daughter like that. The hall changed. Dorothy's voice was not loud, but it carried the authority of a woman who had been pushed past fear. Annie turned toward her mother, stunned. Vanessa stared at her in disbelief. Excuse me? Dorothy's hands shook, but she did not lower them. You tried to take my name. You will not take her voice too. Richard looked at Dorothy with quiet respect. Samuel, standing near the door, gave the smallest nod, as if something long overdue had finally happened. Vanessa looked from Dorothy to Richard and understood no one was stepping in to make Dorothy small again. She pulled on her coat with stiff movements. This house is going to feel very different when I'm gone, she said. Richard answered, I hope so. That struck her harder than he expected. For a second, the anger left her face, and something empty showed through. Then she turned and walked to the door. Martin opened it. Cold air moved through the hall. Vanessa paused on the threshold, waiting perhaps for Richard to call her back, to soften, to save the image they had built. He said nothing. She stepped outside. The door closed behind her. Annie let out the breath she had been holding. Dorothy reached for the chair again, but Richard came forward. Dorothy, you and Annie are not going back to the staff quarters tonight. Dorothy looked up, alarmed. Sir, you'll use the East Guest Suite. Samuel will bring tea. Mrs. Alvarez can sit with you if you want. Dorothy shook her head. Mr. Whitaker, that isn't necessary. It is. Annie's voice was small. We can just go home. I know, Richard said, but not with fear chasing you out of here. Dorothy looked at him then, really looked, and her tired face folded under the weight of the night. I don't know how to accept that. Start by sitting somewhere warm, Richard said. Samuel stepped closer. Mrs. Carter, I'll prepare the suite myself. Dorothy nodded after a long moment. Annie held her hand as they began walking down the hall, away from the service corridor, and toward the rooms reserved for honored guests. Richard watched them go, then looked back at the table where the necklace still lay sealed in plastic. The house was quieter now, but not peaceful. Not yet. Truth had entered, but justice still had work to do. The East guest suite had not been used since a senator stayed there during a charity weekend, and Dorothy moved through it as if every step required permission. The bed was turned down, the lamps were warm, and a tray of towels sat on the bench at the foot of the bed. Annie stayed close to her mother, her eyes moving from the curtains to the fireplace to the silver water pitcher on the nightstand, as if the room itself might accuse them of being in the wrong place. Samuel set a tea tray on the small table near the window. Chamomile for Mrs. Carter, hot chocolate for Annie. Mrs. Alvarez insisted on adding cinnamon. Annie tried to thank him, but her voice caught. Samuel softened. "No need, Miss Annie. Drink while it's hot." Dorothy stood beside the chair, both hands folded in front of her. "Mr. Reed, we can't sleep here. This is for guests." "You are guests tonight," Samuel said. Dorothy looked toward the door. "I work here." "Not tonight." Annie touched her mother's arm. "Mama, please sit down." Dorothy obeyed only because Annie sounded close to breaking again. She lowered herself into the chair and took the cup with both hands. The warmth seemed to surprise her. She closed her eyes for half a second, and Annie watched her with the exhausted focus of someone afraid peace might disappear if she looked away. Samuel turned to leave, but Annie spoke. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Is she really gone?" "For tonight, yes." Annie nodded, but the fear did not leave her face. "She said she'd make sure Mama never worked again." Samuel's mouth tightened. People say many things when they think money gives them a louder voice than truth. Dorothy shook her head. "She has friends, Mr. Reed. People in hotels, clubs, charities. I have worked long enough to know how phone calls get made. A whisper can close a door before a woman even knocks." Samuel did not dismiss it. That helped more than comfort would have. "Then Mr. Whitaker will have to make louder calls." Dorothy looked down into her tea. "I never wanted him dragged into this." Annie's face crumpled. "Mama, he was already in it. It's his house." Dorothy reached for her hand. "I know, baby." Samuel gave them privacy and stepped out, closing the door with care. In the hall, he found Richard waiting near the stair landing. Coat removed now, tie loosened. One hand braced on the railing. He looked older than he had when he entered the house an hour earlier. "How are they?" Richard asked. "Frightened," Samuel said, and trying not to show how much. Richard nodded once. "Of course. Mrs. Carter is worried Miss Caldwell will damage her references." "She won't." Samuel's expression stayed measured. "With respect, sir, Miss Caldwell knows people who enjoy ruining others quietly." Richard looked down the hall toward the guest suite. "Then we won't be quiet." Samuel studied him. "What do you want done tonight?" "Marcus keeps the footage secured. I want written statements from everyone who heard the accusation. No pressure, no coaching. Just what they saw and heard." Richard paused. "And I want Dorothy's employment record copied, including Eleanor's letters about her service." Samuel's face changed at Eleanor's name, but only slightly. "Yes, sir. My attorney gets everything by morning." "Understood." Richard started down the stairs, but his phone vibrated again. Block number. He stopped. Samuel saw the screen. "Again?" Richard answered. "Who are you?" The rough voice came through with no greeting. "Did you find it?" "I found enough." "Then you know." "I know what happened tonight. I don't know who you are." A pause followed, filled with faint street noise from the other end. "My sister worked for Vanessa 3 years ago. Different house, different necklace, same tears." Richard's hand tightened around the phone. "Give me her name. She won't want it used." "Vanessa said my sister stole cash from a fundraiser envelope. No charges, no proof, just rumors. She lost 2 jobs after that. Why call me? Because Dorothy Carter was next." Richard closed his eyes, not from weakness, but from the effort to keep his anger clean. "Can your sister speak to my attorney?" "I'll ask. Don't promise she'll say yes. Some people survive by staying invisible. Tell her I will protect her if she comes forward." "You say that now." "I mean it now." The caller was quiet for a moment. "Then prove it with Dorothy first." The line ended. Richard lowered the phone. Samuel waited without asking. The old man knew that some calls had to settle before they could be spoken aloud. Richard finally said, "There may be another woman, another accusation." Samuel's jaw set. Then tonight was not the first time. No, and perhaps not the last, had Miss Annie kept quiet. Richard looked toward the upper hall again. She should never have had to be brave in my house. No, Samuel said, but she was. Downstairs, Marcus stood near the security monitor with the sealed necklace in a locked evidence case. He looked up when Richard entered the main hall. Sir, I exported the files and logged the item. I also saved the angle showing Miss Caldwell entering the laundry area. Good. I need one more thing. Yes, sir? Find every camera clip from the past 2 weeks showing Vanessa interacting with Dorothy or Annie. Hallways. Kitchen passage. Service entrance. I don't care how ordinary it looks. Marcus nodded. You think there's more? I think there were warnings I didn't see. Marcus took that in, then said, I'll start tonight. Richard picked up the blue jewelry case from the antique table. The empty center where the necklace had rested looked almost foolish now. So much damage built around a thing that could not speak, could not love, could not suffer. He closed the case and handed it to Marcus. Lock that up too. Yes, sir. The house settled into a strained quiet after that. Staff returned to their duties, but no one moved the same way. Doors closed softer. Footsteps slowed near the east wing. Mrs. Alvarez carried a plate of toast and soup up to Dorothy and Annie without being asked. Martin remained outside longer than necessary, clearing snow from the front steps, even after Vanessa's car had disappeared. Near midnight, Richard walked back upstairs. He stopped outside the East guest suite and raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. He did not want to intrude. Before he could leave, Annie opened the door. She looked worn out, wrapped in a robe too large for her eyes still swollen. Mr. Whitaker? I was checking that you and your mother had everything you needed. Annie glanced back into the room. Dorothy was asleep in the chair, not the bed, a blanket over her lap, and one hand still resting near her chest. She said she'd only close her eyes for a minute, Annie whispered. Richard nodded. Let her sleep. Annie stepped into the hall and pulled the door almost closed behind her. Is Miss Caldwell coming back? Not tonight. What about tomorrow? Richard did not give her an easy answer. Tomorrow? I start making sure she can't hurt your mother again. Annie looked down at her bare feet. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. I know. Most people don't. Not at first. Richard felt the shame of that sentence because she did not say it bitterly. She said it like a rule she had learned too early. I believed you too late, he said. Annie shook her head. But you did. For a moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Annie wiped her cheek with the sleeve of the robe and gave a small, tired nod. Good night, Mr. Whitaker. Good night, Annie. She went back inside and closed the door. Richard remained in the hall a moment longer, listening to the quiet on the other side. Then he turned toward the staircase, knowing sleep would not come. By morning, the wedding would no longer be just delayed, and Vanessa Caldwell would learn that Dorothy Carter's name was not something she could break and leave behind. By 6 the next morning, the house was awake, though no one had slept much. Snow tapped softly against the windows, and the kitchen smelled of coffee, toast, and the oatmeal Mrs. Alvarez made whenever the weather turned bitter. Dorothy came downstairs in the same gray uniform she had worn the night before, washed and pressed by habit, though Samuel had sent a clean robe to the guest suite and told her she did not need to work. Annie walked beside her, quiet, pale, and tired. She had borrowed a sweater from Mrs. Alvarez because her own sleeves were damp from the tears she had kept wiping away through the night. When she reached the bottom of the stairs and saw the main hall again, her steps slowed. The table was still there. The jewelry case was gone, but Annie's eyes went to the place where it had been. Dorothy noticed. Keep walking, baby. Annie nodded, but her hand found her mother's. Richard was in the breakfast room with Samuel and Marcus. He had not changed into a suit. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the forearm, his tie was gone, and a stack of printed security stills lay beside his coffee. His attorney, Claire Hensley, was on speakerphone from downtown. When Dorothy appeared, Richard stood. Mrs. Carter, he said. Dorothy looked uncomfortable with the formality. Good morning, sir. Did you sleep? A little, Annie answered honestly. She slept in the chair. Dorothy gave her a tired look. Annie. What? You did? Richard's face softened for a moment. Mrs. Alvarez made breakfast. Please sit. Dorothy shook her head. Sir, I don't think I can eat. Then have coffee or tea, but sit. She sat because the night had taken too much from her to keep refusing kindness. Annie took the chair beside her, close enough that their knees touched under the table. Claire's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Whitaker, is Mrs. Carter present? Yes, Mrs. Carter. I'm Claire Hensley. I represent Mr. Whitaker. I want to be clear. You are not accused of anything. The footage clears you. My concern now is protecting you from further damage. Is it all right if we discuss that? Dorothy looked at Richard, then at Annie. Yes, ma'am. Annie whispered. Mama, ask if Miss Caldwell can still call the police. Claire heard her. She can call anyone she likes, Annie. But if she makes a false report after that footage exists, she creates a serious problem for herself. Annie swallowed. So Mama won't be taken? No, Claire said, firm but kind. Not based on that lie. Dorothy's face folded for 1 second before she covered it. Annie put an arm around her. Richard turned his coffee cup slowly without drinking. Claire, what about references, employment records, rumors? I'll prepare a formal letter today confirming Mrs. Carter's standing with the Whitaker household and documenting that the theft accusation was false. If Miss Caldwell or anyone connected to her repeats the allegation, we respond immediately. Samuel added, I have Eleanor's letter from 2018 regarding Mrs. Carter's service. I can include a copy for the file. Dorothy looked up. Mrs. Whitaker wrote about me? Richard answered quietly. More than once. Dorothy blinked fast and looked down. The phone on the table buzzed, not Richard's this time. Samuel glanced at his own screen. Miss Caldwell is at the front gate. Annie stiffened. Dorothy's hand went around hers at once. Breathe. Richard's face hardened. Why? Samuel listened to the message in his earpiece. She says she needs to collect several personal items and speak with you privately. No private conversation. Claire's voice sharpened through the speaker. Richard, do not meet her without a witness. I won't. Annie's voice came small. Does she have to come in? Richard looked at her. Not near you. Dorothy straightened. Sir, I don't want my daughter seeing her again today. She won't have to. Richard stood. Samuel, put Vanessa in the front sitting room. Marcus, stay with me. Claire, remain on the line. Samuel gave the instruction to the gate, then turned to Dorothy. Mrs. Carter, you and Annie may stay here, or I can take you to the kitchen. Annie looked toward the hall. Kitchen, please. Dorothy nodded. Yes, kitchen. Richard waited until Samuel led them out through the side passage before leaving the breakfast room. Vanessa was already in the sitting room when he arrived. She wore a camel coat over dark slacks, her hair pinned neatly, her face pale from a long night. A black SUV idled outside the window. She stood when Richard entered, then saw Marcus and the phone in Richard's hand. So this is how it is? She asked. This is how it has to be. Vanessa gave a tired laugh. You brought security and a lawyer to speak with the woman you were going to marry. The woman I was going to marry framed a household employee for theft. Her eyes flashed. I told you I panicked. You came back to say that again? I came back because last night was emotional. You were tired. Everyone was watching. I said things badly. So did they. Richard's voice stayed calm. Do not compare what Annie said to what you did. Vanessa looked away, then tried another path. Fine. I'll apologize again. I'll pay Dorothy a year's salary. I'll write whatever statement you want. We can still stop this before it becomes permanent. It is permanent. Her face changed. Meaning what? Meaning the wedding is canceled. She seemed to lose balance without moving. Canceled? Yes. Richard, listen to yourself. I have. No, you're reacting. You're letting guilt make decisions for you. You're 50 years old. You know how ugly this gets. Press calls, board questions, charity gossip, people laughing because a maid and her daughter broke your engagement. Richard stepped closer, not enough to threaten, only enough to make her hear him. They didn't break it. You did. Vanessa's jaw tightened. You are making a fool of yourself. No, Claire said from the phone. He is making a record. Miss Caldwell. Claire Hensley speaking. This conversation is being documented. You are not to contact Dorothy Carter or Annie Carter directly. You are not to repeat the theft allegation. You are not to imply Mrs. Carter resigned due to misconduct. Any attempt to damage her employment or reputation will be treated as intentional. Vanessa looked at the phone as if it had insulted her. You can't threaten me, Claire replied. I just advised you. Vanessa turned back to Richard, her voice dropping. After everything, you would protect them from me? Yes. Why? Richard held her gaze. Because they needed protection from you. For a moment she had no answer. Then the softness returned, quieter than before. I loved you. Richard's expression did not change. Maybe you loved standing next to me. That is not fair. Neither was asking Dorothy to sign away her name. Vanessa looked toward the hall. Where are they? Not available to you. I deserve to speak to Dorothy. No, Dorothy deserves peace. Her mouth twisted. You've made her important now. I hope you understand what that does to people. Richard heard the old contempt beneath the polished words. It answered the last question he had carried into the room. You may collect your personal items with Samuel and Marcus present, he said. Not today from the private rooms. Samuel will arrange delivery. For now, take what you brought with you and leave. Vanessa's eyes filled again, but he saw anger behind them. You'll regret humiliating me. Richard said, I regret not seeing you sooner. She picked up her purse with a sharp motion. Then enjoy your noble little household. She walked out past Marcus, through the hall, and toward the front door. Richard did not follow her to the steps. He stood in the sitting room until he heard the door close and the SUV pull away. When he returned to the kitchen, Annie was sitting at the table with a mug of hot chocolate untouched between her hands. Dorothy sat beside her, trying to look composed. Richard stopped at the doorway. She's gone. Annie looked up. For good? The wedding is canceled. Dorothy closed her eyes. Annie let out a breath that shook through her. Richard entered slowly. I am sorry this became part of your life. Dorothy said, Sir, we just want to work and go home safe. I know, he said, and from now on, that will not be too much to ask. Richard's promise stayed in the kitchen longer than his voice did. Dorothy sat with both hands around the coffee cup Mrs. Alvarez had placed before her, but she had not taken a sip. Annie's hot chocolate had gone untouched too. The steam rose between them, small and patient, while the house tried to return to its morning rhythm around a wound no one knew how to cover. Mrs. Alvarez moved quietly at the stove, giving them privacy without leaving them alone. Samuel stood near the pantry door, and Marcus remained in the hallway, speaking in a low voice to someone from security. Richard could feel everyone waiting for him to say what came next. Dorothy finally looked up. Mr. Whitaker, may I go home today? Annie turned to her quickly. Mama, Dorothy touched her daughter's hand. Just for a little while. I need my own walls. I need to check on your grandmother. I need... Her voice thinned, but she kept it steady. I need to breathe somewhere that doesn't have that hallway in it. Richard nodded. Of course. Martin will drive you. Dorothy shook her head at once. No, sir. We can take the bus. No. She looked uncomfortable. Sir, I don't want people saying I took advantage of this. Richard sat across from her, not at the head of the table, but across, where he had to meet her as a person and not as an employer. Dorothy, last night you were almost forced out of this house with a false confession in your hand. Accepting a ride home is not taking advantage. Annie's eyes filled again, though she tried to blink it away. Mama, please, just let him send the car. Dorothy looked at her daughter's face and gave in. All right, thank you. Richard turned to Samuel. Martin can bring the sedan around whenever they're ready. Yes, sir. Dorothy set her cup down. What happens to my job? The question cut through the kitchen. Annie looked at Richard with fear returning to her face. Richard answered carefully, Your job is secure. Dorothy pressed her lips together. With respect, sir. Secure for how long? I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but when folks with money end an engagement, people look for someone to blame. Miss Caldwell has friends. She'll tell them a version that makes me the reason. Annie whispered, Mama, don't. No, Dorothy said softly. We need to ask. Richard appreciated that. Fear had not taken her sense from her. You're right to ask. Claire is drafting a statement for your file. Marcus has the footage. Samuel is gathering staff statements. If Vanessa repeats that accusation, she will face legal action. Dorothy nodded, but her worry remained. Legal letters don't always stop whispers. No, Richard said. They don't. Mrs. Alvarez set a plate of toast near Dorothy. Eat one bite, honey. Dorothy managed a tired smile. You sound like my mother. Good. Then listen. Annie gave the smallest laugh, and for the first time since Richard had entered the kitchen, her face loosened. Then the laugh vanished as quickly as it came. Samuel cleared his throat. Sir, the household schedule for today needs to be adjusted. Wedding vendors were expected at noon to review the floral layout and linen inventory. Cancel them. All of them? All wedding-related appointments. Samuel nodded. And if they ask for a reason, tell them plans have changed and my office will contact them. Richard's phone buzzed on the table. Claire's name appeared. He answered on speaker, after a glance at Dorothy. Claire, I have the first draft of the notice to Caldwell's counsel. I'm also sending a preservation demand regarding all communications about Mrs. Carter. Texts, emails, voicemails, anything Vanessa or her team sent. Good. Claire continued. Richard, there is another issue. If the engagement is canceled, society reporters will start calling by lunch. You need a response. Dorothy's shoulders tensed. Please don't put my name in anything. Richard answered before Claire could. Her name stays private. Claire said. Then the public line is, the wedding has been canceled due to a private matter, and there will be no further comment. Yes. Annie looked at him. So people won't know what she did? Richard met her eyes. Not unless your mother wants that known. Annie looked down. She was young enough to want the whole city to know, old enough to understand why her mother might not survive that kind of attention. I just don't want her lying about Mama. She won't get to do that safely, Claire said through the phone. That's my job. Dorothy gave a weary nod. Thank you, ma'am. After the call ended, the kitchen shifted back into quiet movement. Mrs. Alvarez wrapped toast in foil for Dorothy to take home. Samuel went to call Martin. Marcus entered with a folder and placed it on the table near Richard. Printed stills, timestamps, and the incident log, Marcus said. I also reviewed the footage from the last week. There are several clips of Miss Caldwell stopping Mrs. Carter near the service hall, but there's no audio. Richard opened the folder. Anything useful? Maybe not legally, but it shows a pattern. Mrs. Carter walking away upset more than once. Dorothy looked embarrassed. I didn't want to complain. Richard closed the folder. You should not have had to. Annie's voice came quiet. She didn't complain because she needed the job. Dorothy gave her a look, but Annie kept going. That's what people don't understand. They think staying quiet means nothing happened. Sometimes staying quiet means rent is due Friday. No one corrected her. No one softened the sentence. It was too plain to need dressing. Richard stood. Dorothy, when you come back, we will discuss your position here. Dorothy's face tightened. Am I being moved? Yes. Annie stiffened. Moved where? Richard turned to them both. Up, not out. Dorothy did not seem to understand. Richard continued. For years, you have been doing more than cleaning. You know this house, this staff, the routines, the vendors, the standards Eleanor trusted. I should have recognized that formally long ago. Dorothy shook her head. Sir, I'm a cleaning woman. You are the most trusted person under this roof. Her eyes shone, but she resisted the words. I don't know how to be anything fancy. I'm not asking for fancy. I'm asking for honest. Annie looked at her mother, hope and fear mixing on her face. Mama, Dorothy held up a hand, not to silence her, but to steady herself. I need time. You'll have it, Richard said. Go home today. Be with your family. Your pay continues. No one will question your place here again. Martin appeared at the kitchen doorway. Car is ready, Mr. Whitaker. Dorothy rose slowly. Annie gathered their coats from the chair. Mrs. Alvarez pressed the foil-wrapped toast into Annie's hands. Make sure she eats, Mrs. Alvarez said. I will, Annie whispered. At the back entrance, Dorothy stopped. For years, she had left through that door because it was closest to the service drive. Richard saw her hesitate and understood. Martin is at the front, he said. Dorothy turned to him. Sir, you and Annie leave through the front today. Dorothy's eyes filled again. Annie covered her mouth. They walked through the main hall together. The table was clear now. No jewelry case. No letter. No accusation waiting in the open. At the front door, Samuel helped Dorothy with her coat the same way he would assist any guest. Dorothy looked overwhelmed by the gesture, but she let him. Before stepping outside, Annie turned to Richard. Thank you for hearing me. Richard shook his head. Thank you for speaking. Annie looked as if she might cry again, but this time she managed to stand straighter. She took her mother's hand, and together they walked out the front door into the pale Chicago morning. Richard watched the sedan pull away, then turned back to the house. It felt larger than before, and emptier. Vanessa was gone, the wedding was canceled, and the truth had been found. But justice, Richard knew now, was not just proving a lie. It was repairing what the lie had almost destroyed. The sedan carried Dorothy and Annie south through morning traffic, past glass towers, bus stops, corner stores with metal grates still half lowered, and sidewalks where people walked with their collars up against the cold. Annie sat beside her mother in the back seat with the foil-wrapped toast on her lap. She had not eaten it. Every few blocks, she looked over as if to make sure Dorothy was still there. Dorothy noticed on the third time. Baby, I'm sitting right here. I know. Then stopped checking like I might disappear. Annie tried to smile, but it did not hold. I can't help it. Dorothy reached for her hand. I know. Martin kept his eyes on the road and the partition down enough to hear if they needed anything. But he did not intrude. When they reached the modest apartment building where Dorothy lived with Annie and Dorothy's mother, he pulled to the curb and stepped out before Dorothy could open her own door. Dorothy looked embarrassed. Martin, you don't have to do all that. He held the door anyway. Mrs. Carter, after last night, let me do something simple. She accepted because refusing would only make him stand longer in the snow. Annie climbed out behind her, clutching the toast like it mattered. Their building was old but cared for, with salt scattered on the front steps and a plastic wreath still hanging beside the entrance long after Christmas. Dorothy stopped at the door and looked back toward the car. Thank you, she said. Martin nodded. Mr. Whitaker said to call when you need to return, or if you need groceries, medicine, anything. Dorothy shook her head gently. We're all right. Annie opened the door with her key. Mama, just say thank you. Dorothy gave her a tired look. Thank you, Martin. Inside, the hallway smelled of radiator heat, floor cleaner, and someone frying onions upstairs. It was not grand. The carpet was worn near the stairs, and the mailbox labels had been taped over more than once. But Annie felt her shoulders drop for the first time since the night before. This was home. No marble table, no jewelry case, no woman in silk telling them they had no place. Their apartment door opened before Annie could knock. Dorothy's mother, Mabel Carter, stood there in her house slippers and thick blue robe, one hand gripping the doorframe. Where have you two been? Dorothy's face folded at the sight of her. Mama, Mabel looked from Dorothy's eyes to Annie's swollen face. Don't mama me. Come in here. Annie stepped inside first and put the toast on the kitchen counter. The apartment was warm, crowded with family photographs, a small Bible near the lamp, a bowl of oranges on the table, and a quilt folded over the couch. Mabel closed the door and turned back to them. Now somebody tell me why my daughter looks like she spent the night fighting with the world. Annie broke first. She went to her grandmother and buried her face against her shoulder. Grandma, she almost got Mama arrested. Mabel's arms went around her at once. Who? Dorothy took off her coat slowly. Miss Caldwell. The fiancée? Mabel's eyes sharpened. That skinny woman with the smile that never reaches Sunday? Mama, Dorothy said softly. What did she do? Dorothy sat at the kitchen table before her knees could betray her. Annie told most of it because Dorothy kept stopping. She told Mabel about the necklace, the resignation letter, the threat, the camera, Richard, Samuel, the footage, and Vanessa being sent away. The more Annie spoke, the smaller her voice became, until Mabel pulled out the chair beside her and made her sit. When the story ended, Mabel looked at Dorothy for a long moment. Did you eat? Dorothy blinked. Mama, did you hear what she said? I heard. I also heard my daughter hasn't eaten. Annie pushed the foil packet toward her. Mrs. Alvarez sent toast. Mabel opened it, saw the slices inside, and nodded like Mrs. Alvarez had passed some test. Good woman. I always liked her. You met her once, Annie said. Once was enough. Dorothy laughed then, a small broken laugh that turned quickly into tears. Mabel moved to her side and held her head against her chest the way she must have when Dorothy was young. You kept your name, Mabel said. They tried to take it, but they didn't. Dorothy closed her eyes. Annie saved me. Annie shook her head. Mr. Whitaker checked the cameras. Mabel turned to her. And why did he check them? Annie looked down. Because you spoke, Mabel said. Don't make your courage smaller because a rich man finally did the right thing. Annie's mouth trembled. I was scared. Courage is scared half the time. Across town, Richard stood in Eleanor's old sitting room while Samuel opened a locked cabinet that had not been used in months. The room had been kept clean but not lived in, with cream curtains, a writing desk, and a faint scent of lavender polish. Richard did not sit. He watched Samuel remove a slim folder tied with a blue ribbon. These are the notes Mrs. Whitaker left regarding household staff, Samuel said, including Mrs. Carter. Richard accepted the folder. I should have looked at these years ago. Yes, sir. Richard looked at him. Samuel did not apologize for the honesty. You asked me once to keep the house running. I did. But a house can run and still fail people inside it. Richard opened the folder and found staff evaluations, handwritten notes, small records of kindness and competence. Dorothy's name appeared more than once. He did not read them all, not yet. He could not bear how carefully Eleanor had noticed what he had allowed himself to overlook. His phone rang. Claire. Richard, she said when he answered. Vanessa's attorney called. They want this treated as a misunderstanding caused by emotional distress. No, I assumed. What else? She is asking for the ring to be returned through counsel and claims the necklace incident should remain confidential for everyone's good. Richard looked toward the window, where snow moved against the glass. The ring is mine. The necklace is evidence. Until Dorothy is fully protected. Claire paused. That will make this uglier. It is already ugly. I'm done polishing it. Good. Then I'll send the cancellation notices. To everyone? Vendors, planner, hotel, media liaison. Public statement stays private matter, no details. Keep Dorothy and Annie out of it. I will. After he ended the call, Samuel placed another paper on the desk. This is Mrs. Carter's current employment agreement. Richard read the job title at the top, cleaning staff, hourly. The words seemed too small for 12 years of trust. Draft a new position, Richard said. House manager. Samuel's eyebrows lifted. Not head housekeeper? No. House manager. Full salary, benefits, retirement contribution, authority over household operations. She reports to me, not to any future guest, fiancé, or family member. Samuel nodded, and something like approval passed through his eyes. Yes, sir. Do it today. I'll prepare it. Back in the apartment, Dorothy had finally eaten half a slice of toast because Mabel stood over her until she did. Annie sat by the window, watching the street below. A city bus hissed to a stop at the corner, and a woman with grocery bags stepped around a patch of ice. Dorothy came to stand beside her. You thinking about school? Annie shook her head. I'm thinking about how fast everything can change. Dorothy touched her hair. That's why we hold on to what doesn't. What's that? Who we are. Annie leaned against her mother's side. Do you think he'll really protect us? Dorothy watched the bus pull away. I think he wants to. That's not the same. No, Dorothy said. It isn't. But today, wanting to is more than we had yesterday. Annie nodded, but her eyes stayed on the street, on people going to work, carrying bags, waiting for buses, living ordinary lives without knowing that a woman's name had nearly been destroyed in a mansion by the lake. For the first time, she understood how much of justice happened where no crowd could see it. Dorothy kissed the top of her head. Come eat before your grandmother starts on both of us. Annie turned from the window and followed her back to the kitchen. Outside, the snow kept falling over Chicago, covering rich streets and poor ones with the same white dust. Inside two very different homes, decisions were being made about Dorothy Carter's future, and for once, none of them required her to bow her head. By late afternoon, the snow had slowed to a fine mist over the city, and the Whitaker house had taken on the careful quiet of a place waiting for news. Wedding florists had been canceled. The hotel had been notified. The planner had called 3 times, then stopped after Claire Hensley's office took over. In the main hall, the long table where Vanessa's jewelry case had been displayed was bare now, polished clean but not forgotten. Richard stood in his study with Samuel, Claire on speakerphone, and a stack of documents spread across the desk. The engagement ring sat in a small black box beside the papers. Vanessa had left it upstairs the night before, either by accident or because she believed she would return for it as Richard's fiancée. He had not opened the box again. Claire's voice came through the phone. Her attorney is pushing hard for a joint statement. Something polite. Mutual respect. Private family reasons. They also want the ring delivered today. Richard looked at the box. No. Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing. Claire asked, no to the wording or no to the ring? Both. The ring is legally likely yours, but fighting over it may keep her in contact with you longer than necessary. I don't care about the ring. I care about what it says if I hand it back quietly while she threatens Dorothy's reputation. Claire paused. Then we hold it pending resolution. I'll put that in writing. Samuel set a fresh folder on the desk. The new employment agreement is ready, sir. House manager. Full salary. Benefits. Retirement contribution. Paid leave. And authority over all household staff operations. Richard picked it up. Good. There is one more matter, Samuel said. Mrs. Carter may feel overwhelmed by a title that large. She has earned more than that title. I agree. But Mrs. Carter has survived by not attracting envy. A promotion of this kind may feel less like a gift and more like standing under a bright light. Richard let that settle. Samuel had a way of saying difficult things without polishing them. It was one of the reasons Eleanor had trusted him. Then we present it as a choice, Richard said, not a command. Claire added, that is important legally and morally. After what happened, she needs control, not another decision made over her head. Richard closed the folder. I'll speak to her tomorrow. No, Samuel said gently. Richard turned. Samuel met his eyes. Speak to her when she is ready. You have had 1 day to decide how to repair this. She has had 1 day to absorb how close she came to losing everything. Richard looked down at the folder again. You're right. The desk phone rang before he could say more. Samuel answered, listened, then covered the receiver. Miss Caldwell's attorney is on the line for you directly. He says it is urgent. Claire said, put him through, but leave me on. Samuel connected the call. A man's voice entered, smooth and clipped. Mr. Whitaker. This is Paul Kendrick, counsel for Vanessa Caldwell. I'll be brief. Miss Caldwell is emotionally devastated. She believes last night has been exaggerated and mishandled. She is willing to apologize privately to your employee and move forward with wedding discussions after a cooling-off period. Richard did not sit. There will be no wedding discussions. Mr. Whitaker, emotions are high. Yes, Dorothy Carter was threatened with police over a crime Vanessa staged. Kendrick cleared his throat. My client disputes that language. She can dispute it with the footage. Claire spoke then. Mr. Kendrick. Claire Hensley. We have preserved video evidence, witness accounts, and the forced resignation document. If your client repeats or implies that Mrs. Carter stole anything, we will act. I'm not calling to debate evidence, Kendrick said. I'm calling to prevent reputational harm to all parties. Richard's voice lowered. Dorothy's reputation was the one Vanessa tried to harm. My client also has a reputation. She should have thought of that before hiding a necklace in a cleaning cart. There was a short pause. Kendrick's tone cooled. Is that your final position? Richard picked up the ring box and held it in his palm. It felt heavier than it should have, a small container for a promise that now made him feel foolish. My final position is this, he said. The engagement is over. The wedding is canceled. Vanessa is not to contact Dorothy Carter, Annie Carter, any member of my staff, or any vendor with statements about last night. Any personal property of hers will be packed by my staff and delivered through counsel. She is not welcome at my home. Mr. Whitaker and Mr. Kendrick, Richard said, cutting in. If she wants to tell people I ended the engagement, she may. If she wants to tell them we were incompatible, fine. But if she puts one stain on Dorothy Carter's name, I will release the truth where appropriate and let your client explain the video herself. Claire said, that is our legal position as well. Kendrick's voice became flat. I'll advise my client. The call ended. Samuel exhaled quietly. That will make her angry. She already was. Angry people with social connections can be careless in dangerous ways. Then we prepare. Richard opened the ring box. The diamond inside caught the desk lamp, expensive and empty. He remembered giving it to Vanessa at a private dinner overlooking the river. She had cried then, too. He wondered now how many of her tears had been real, and how many had been tools she had sharpened long before him. He closed the box. "Send this to Claire's office," he said. Samuel nodded. "Yes, sir." A light knock came at the study door. Mrs. Alvarez stepped in, wiping her hands on a towel. "Mr. Whitaker," Mrs. Carter called. She asked if she and Annie could come tomorrow morning to pick up a few things from the staff quarters. Richard's face softened. "Of course." She sounded worried about disturbing the house. Richard looked around the study, at the canceled wedding folders, the ring box, the legal papers, the reminders of what his house had allowed. "Tell her this house can be disturbed for the right reasons." Mrs. Alvarez nodded, then hesitated. Annie asked if Miss Caldwell would be here. "She won't. I'll tell them." After she left, Samuel gathered the papers into order. "There is something else you may want to consider, sir." "What?" "The staff saw what happened. They also saw what you did after. That matters. But tomorrow, when Mrs. Carter walks back in, they will watch how you greet her." Richard understood. "Not as someone rescued. No, sir, as someone respected." The next morning came gray but clear. Dorothy and Annie arrived in Martin's sedan just after 9. Dorothy wore her own coat and Sunday shoes, not her uniform. Annie stepped out beside her, holding a tote bag against her chest. She looked nervous, but she walked with her mother through the front entrance. Richard was waiting in the hall with Samuel, Mrs. Alvarez, and Marcus nearby, not lined up like ceremony, just present. Dorothy stopped. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker." Richard came forward, not too fast. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." "Good morning, Annie." Annie nodded. "Morning." Her voice was small, but she did not lower her eyes. Richard opened the study door. "When you're ready, I'd like to speak with both of you. Not about last night, about what comes next." Dorothy's hand found Annie's. "What comes next?" Richard thought of the torn resignation letter, the necklace in plastic, the ring locked away, and the woman who had tried to turn fear into silence. Then he looked at Dorothy Carter, standing at the front of the house with her daughter beside her. "What should have come a long time ago?" he said. "A choice that honors the work you've already done." Dorothy did not move at first. The word choice seemed to make her more cautious, not less. For years, choices in houses like this had usually meant choosing which insult to swallow, which hour to work, which bill to pay late. She looked at Richard, then at Samuel, then at Annie, who stood beside her with the tote bag held tight against her coat. "Sir," Dorothy said, "if this is about giving me time off, I appreciate it, but I don't want special treatment." Richard opened the study door wider. "It isn't special treatment, and it is not charity." Annie's face shifted at the word charity. Richard noticed and regretted needing to say it at all. Dorothy stepped into the study slowly. Annie followed, sitting only after her mother sat. Samuel remained near the door, not as a guard, but as a witness. Mrs. Alvarez had gone back to the kitchen, though Richard suspected she had not gone far. Richard placed the folder on the desk but did not push it toward Dorothy yet. "Before I say anything, I want you to know you can refuse. Nothing will happen to your current pay if you do. Nothing will happen to your place here if you need time. I'm not asking for an answer this minute." Dorothy's hands folded in her lap. "That makes me more nervous, Mr. Whitaker." Annie tried to smile, but her eyes were already wet. "Mama." Richard sat across from them. "For 12 years, you have worked in this house as cleaning staff. That title is too small for what you've done. You know every vendor who can be trusted. You know which staff members need better hours. You know what breaks before I know it breaks. You know how Eleanor wanted this place run, and you have kept more of her standards alive than I have." Dorothy lowered her head at Eleanor's name. "Mrs. Whitaker was good to me. She respected you," Richard said, "and she was right to." He opened the folder and slid the first page toward Dorothy. "I would like to offer you the position of house manager." Dorothy did not touch the paper. "House manager?" "Yes. Full salary, benefits, paid leave, retirement contribution, authority over the household schedule, vendors, staff assignments, and daily operations. You would report directly to me. No guest, family member, fiancé, or future resident has the right to overrule your dignity or threaten your job." Annie pressed a hand to her mouth. Dorothy looked at the document as if it had been written in another language. Mr. Whitaker, I clean rooms. You manage people's comfort, Samuel said from the door. There is a difference, Mrs. Carter, but not the one you think. Dorothy turned toward him. Mr. Reed, I don't have that kind of education. Samuel's face softened. Neither did I when Mr. Whitaker's father trusted me with keys larger than my confidence. Richard nodded. Training will be provided for anything you want training in. Accounting systems, vendor contracts, scheduling software. But judgment cannot be trained into a person. You already have that. Dorothy's eyes filled, and she blinked hard, fighting it. People will say, I got this because of what happened. Some may, Richard said. People often talk when a person they overlooked is finally seen. Annie's voice trembled. But she earned it. She earned it before last night. Richard looked at her. Yes, she did. Dorothy turned to Annie. Baby, don't cry. I'm trying not to. Annie gave a small broken laugh. But you always told me good work matters. And then I watched people act like it didn't. Dorothy took her hand. Good work matters, even when people don't admit it. Richard picked up another paper. This is not public unless you want it to be. Staff will be informed respectfully. You will have time to decide how the transition happens. If any person in this house treats you as less than your position requires, Samuel and I will handle it. Dorothy looked at Samuel. And what about you? Samuel gave a quiet smile. I am old enough to welcome help, and wise enough to know when it has arrived. For the first time that morning, Dorothy's mouth curved slightly. You always did know how to make a thing sound proper. I've had practice. The small exchange eased the air. Annie wiped her face with her sleeve, then seemed embarrassed and lowered her hand quickly. Richard reached for the tissue box on the desk and placed it near her without comment. Annie took one with a whispered thanks. Dorothy finally touched the document. Her fingers moved over the printed title, House Manager. I don't know if I can carry this, Richard answered. You carried accusation last night. This should be lighter. She drew in a slow breath. Responsibility isn't light. No, he said, but it can be honest. Dorothy looked at Annie. The poor young woman was trying to look hopeful without pressuring her mother. But hope kept breaking through. Dorothy saw it and looked away before it made the decision for her. I need to talk with my mother, Dorothy said. And Annie, I need to pray on it. Take all the time you need. Dorothy nodded, then looked back at the page. If I say yes, I don't want anyone thinking I'm above the work. Richard almost answered, but Samuel did first. Mrs. Carter, no honest manager is above honest work, but you should no longer be trapped beneath someone else's disrespect. Dorothy's eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, she looked tired, but steadier. Then I'll consider it. That is all I ask, Richard said. Annie leaned toward her mother. Mama, can I say something? Dorothy nodded. Annie looked at Richard, then at Samuel, then back at her mother. Last night, when she told you to sign that paper, I thought maybe this was how the world worked. People with money write things, and people like us have to carry them. But today... She stopped, struggling with the words. Today there's another paper, and this one doesn't take your name, it gives it back. Dorothy broke then, but quietly. She pulled Annie close, and Annie folded into her, no longer trying to be strong. Richard looked down at his desk, giving them what privacy he could. After a moment, Dorothy wiped her face and stood. We should get our things from the staff quarters. Richard rose too. Samuel can help. No, sir, Dorothy said, gentle but firm. I can do that myself. Richard accepted the boundary. Of course. They left the study together. In the hallway, Mrs. Alvarez pretended to be adjusting flowers that did not need adjusting. When Dorothy passed, she touched her arm and said, Lunch is packed for you and Miss Annie. Don't argue. Dorothy sighed. Does anyone in this house let a woman refuse food? Not when she needs it, Mrs. Alvarez said. Annie smiled through fresh tears. At the service corridor, Dorothy slowed. That narrow hall had been part of her life for years. The carts, the supply closet, the side exit, the place where workers moved so guests never had to make room for them. She looked at it for a long time, then turned toward the main staircase instead. Annie noticed. Mama? Dorothy held the folder to her chest. I'm not ready to say yes yet. I know, but if I do, Dorothy said, her voice quiet, I won't spend the rest of my life entering my own workplace like I should apologize for being there. Richard, standing a few steps behind them, heard every word. Samuel heard it too, and the old man's voice was soft when he said, "That sounds like a fine beginning, Mrs. Carter." Dorothy did not answer, but she kept walking beside Annie, not toward the back hall, but through the center of the house. For the first time in many years, no one asked her to move aside. A week passed before Dorothy gave Richard her answer. She did not rush it. She spoke with Mabel at the kitchen table in their apartment, spoke with Annie during the bus ride to school, and spent one long evening reading the offer line by line with a neighbor who worked in payroll for a hospital. She wanted to make sure she understood every word before she put her name on anything. When she returned to the Whitaker house the following Monday, she wore a navy dress under her winter coat and carried the folder in both hands. Annie came with her, quiet but alert, her hair pulled back, her eyes less swollen than before. The house felt different when they stepped through the front entrance. Not fixed, not innocent, but awake in a way it had not been before. Samuel met them in the hall. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter, Miss Annie." Dorothy gave him a careful smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Mrs. Alvarez appeared from the kitchen passage with a towel over one shoulder. "Don't start any important meeting before I feed somebody." Annie almost laughed. "Mrs. Alvarez, we ate. That was before you came here. It doesn't count." Dorothy shook her head, but the small warmth in the exchange helped steady her. Richard came from the study a moment later. He was dressed for work, but he had not gone to the office. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "Annie." Dorothy held out the folder. "I read it." "No rush," Richard said. "I know, that's why I can answer." She looked down at the folder, then back at him. "I'll accept the position, if the offer still stands." For a moment, Richard said nothing. Then he nodded. "It stands." Annie pressed her lips together, fighting tears again. But this time her face carried something brighter than fear. Dorothy noticed and gave her a warning look. "Don't start," Dorothy said softly. "I'm not starting," Annie whispered, already crying. Mrs. Alvarez muttered, "She gets that from you." Dorothy gave her a look. "You are not helping." Samuel took the folder from Dorothy and placed it on the small writing table near the hall. Richard handed her a pen, but he did not stand over her. Dorothy appreciated that. She signed her name slowly, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted every letter to feel like hers. "Dorothy Carter, house manager." When she finished, Samuel took the paper and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Carter." Dorothy took a breath. "Thank you." Richard turned toward the gathered staff. He had not called them in like an audience, but word had moved through the house, and people had found reasons to pass near the hall. The kitchen staff, maintenance, Martin from the drive, Marcus from security, and 2 housekeepers stood close enough to hear. "Mrs. Carter will begin as house manager today," Richard said. "She has my full authority in household operations. You will bring concerns to her the same way you would bring them to me or Mr. Reed. More importantly, you will give her the respect she should have received long before the title changed." No one questioned it. Martin nodded first. Mrs. Alvarez wiped her hands on her towel and said, "About time." Dorothy turned toward her. "Please don't make me cry before lunch." "Then eat lunch," Mrs. Alvarez said. Annie laughed through her tears, and the sound loosened something in the hall. Richard saw Dorothy stand a little taller, not from pride alone, but from relief that she had not been placed above people who resented her. She had been recognized by people who already knew what she was worth. Later that afternoon, Richard asked Dorothy and Annie to ride with him downtown. Dorothy became cautious at once. "Sir, is this about work?" "In a way," Richard said, "but not at the house." Annie looked between them. "Are we in trouble?" Richard's face softened. "No, Annie. Not ever for asking that, but no." Martin drove them toward the center of Chicago, where the buildings rose close together and the lake flashed gray between streets. The car stopped outside a brick apartment building with large windows, a doorman, and a small grocery store on the corner. It was not a palace. It was better than that. It looked safe, lived in, warm. Dorothy's expression changed. "Mr. Whitaker," Richard did not let her finish the refusal before it began. "Come inside first." The apartment was on the 6th floor. 2 bedrooms, clean kitchen, sunlight from the east-facing windows, a view of the train line and the rooftops beyond it. Annie walked in slowly, holding her breath as if sound might break the place. Dorothy stopped near the kitchen counter, her purse still on her shoulder. Richard handed her an envelope. "This is not charity. I want that clear before anything else is said." Dorothy did not take it. "Then what is it?" "Back pay for what this household failed to name. A housing stipend written into your new contract. The first year is covered. After that, the rent support continues as part of your salary package. If you want to stay here, the lease is in your name, not mine." Annie turned toward her mother, stunned. "Mama." Dorothy's face tightened. "Sir, I can't accept an apartment because someone hurt me." "You're not," Richard said. "You are accepting safe housing because your new position requires stability, and because you have spent years giving stability to my home while worrying about your own." Dorothy looked toward the window. Down below, people moved along the sidewalk with grocery bags and coffee cups. Ordinary people. Her kind of people. The building was close to Annie's school, close to the train, close to the clinic where Mabel had her appointments. Richard had chosen carefully, and that made it harder to refuse. Annie walked to the smaller bedroom. There was nothing in it yet except light. She stood in the doorway with one hand over her mouth. Dorothy saw her and almost lost the strength to argue. Richard spoke quietly. "You protected this house when my judgment failed. Let me protect your home now." Dorothy closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. "I don't know how to receive things like this. Receive it as part of what you earned." Annie came back and took her mother's hand. "Mama, please." Dorothy looked at her daughter, then at the envelope. Slowly, she accepted it. "Thank you," she said, "but I want everything written properly. Taxes, lease, all of it. I won't have anybody saying we were bought." Richard nodded. Claire already prepared the documents. For the first time, Dorothy smiled fully. "Good. Then maybe you are learning." Richard let out a quiet breath that almost became a laugh. "I'm trying." A month later, the wedding date came and went without flowers, music, or guests. Vanessa's name faded from the house calendar. Her belongings were gone. The ring remained with counsel until all matters were settled. There were rumors, of course, but they met a wall of legal letters, security records, and Richard's refusal to let Dorothy's name become gossip. Dorothy walked through the front door each morning now. Some days she still paused, old habit pulling her toward the service entrance, but Annie teased her gently whenever she saw it. "Mama, front door," Dorothy would sigh. "I know where the door is. Then use it like you mean it." On the first morning Annie visited after they moved into the apartment, she stood in the main hall watching Dorothy give instructions to a vendor twice her size and twice as loud. Dorothy did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The man listened. Richard came to stand nearby. "Are you all right, Annie?" Annie looked at her mother, then at the hall where she had once cried so hard she could barely speak. "I am now," she said, "because this time, someone believed us." Richard was quiet for a moment. "No," he said gently. "This time, someone finally listened." Annie nodded, and neither of them said more. Across the hall, Dorothy turned with a clipboard in her hand, no longer carrying someone else's shame, no longer walking through the house as if she needed permission to exist. Outside, Chicago moved on in its hard, busy way. Inside, justice did not arrive with applause. It arrived in a signed name, a front door used without apology, and a mother whose daughter could finally watch her stand without fear. The lesson of this story is that a person's worth is never measured by wealth, title, or social status, but by honesty, courage, and the way they treat those with less power. Dorothy had little money, but she carried a clean name. Annie had no influence, but she had the courage to speak when silence would have protected the lie. Richard learned that justice is not only about proving who is guilty, it is about listening to the people others try to ignore. In the end, the story reminds us that truth may tremble when it is first spoken, but when someone finally listens, it can restore dignity, protect the innocent, and change a house forever. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.